In this week's episode of Range Fitness Online, John and Paul discuss different types of training programs when it comes to competition, life, and overall general health. Thank you and enjoy the show.
You had said when someone, for instance, is focused on, let's just say, a specific kind of lift for a competition, that they will perform that exercise kind of ad nauseum. But then you also said that they will do things to support that. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
But like if deadlift is, let's say, the hypothetical competition we're working, right? They'll do a lot of things that help build hip flexion and hip extension. So you might do some hip thrust work. You'll do a lot of, again, deadlifting, maybe some variations of deadlifting. Hopefully they're doing some things with some lunges and stuff, even some Bulgarian lunges and things of that nature. Going into maybe single leg work, again, like the lunges, may be a little bit more rare, right? It might be something they dabble into and play with. But as we start getting into kind of the more auxiliary, it may be not as focused in for them. Not that people are going to work calves or forearms, but they do. People that are working a deadlift, they could probably benefit from working forearms and calves, but it's probably not going to take a lot of their focus, or they're not going to spend a lot of time in it because, again, that's a small percentage maybe that's going to help them with their deadlift. Whereas a physique competitor, having popping forearms and popping calves is going to be a little bit more paramount to their success. So they'll make that time and those efforts to spend that time in that.
For anyone who might be confused, by popping, he doesn't mean that it sounds like bubble wrap whenever you move. It means just highly presenting. Okay.
Absolutely. No noise necessarily.
Right. And then when you have someone who's just focused on, again, who's primarily focused on health and wellness, they might do things that are going to not be geared toward either one of those things. They're going to be more specifically focused on making sure that muscles are loaded to keep them healthy, making sure that bones are stressed to keep them healthy, for purposes of longevity and vitality.
And even some, like mobility exercises come to mind, right? And it's not to say that people who are working sort of competition are not going to be doing some sort of a mobility efforts. But like, back to that sound equalization, who's working more general health and fitness might make a mobility session a workout session in and of itself. Right, and which can be done if you've ever done some sort of like flow yoga class, right? Like if you ever done Paul's class, let's call it. But that is a form of mobility that is also a workout for people, right? And you bring people to just quibbling balls of sweat and tears from holding planks and pigeons.
Yeah.
Anyhow, all that to be said, though, is again someone who's focusing again on a physique or a record number or a number for a lift, a weight total for a lift. They might do some mobility efforts to help them do the lift, to be able to perform the lift. It'd be kind of like taking your car out for a drive. You realize as you're going, you're trying to get there as fast as you can, and that the car starts pulling to the left. So you just air up the tire real quick, and then you keep driving. Versus you're going on a family trip, so you stop off at the oil and lube station. They check the tire. They say, hey, you got a leak. You say, let's go ahead and put a patch on it if we can. And then you keep going down the road at whatever the posted speed limit is, right? That's a little bit of the difference we're talking about here.
So if we're dividing the general population of people into results driven or output driven or quality of life driven, what we're trying to illustrate here is that for each one of those things, you are choosing results and you are also choosing problems, right? Maybe that's a more identifiable way to say it, right? Talking to someone once, should I do this or this? Which one do you think is a mistake? And I said, well, they're both mistakes. I mean, you obviously have to choose one or the other, but they're both mistakes because mistakes implies that the other choice will yield you no problems.
Right.
And you need to get out of that mindset, right? You are choosing benefits, but you are also choosing problems. And so the whole thing about choosing imbalance off mic, when John and I were talking, you had talked about and categorized this really well, I thought, when you talked about competition, results-driven people have goals with due dates and achievements.
Right.
And I thought that that was a really, really excellent way to put that. Goals with due dates and achievements. You just talked about that a little bit. Can you go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, it's again, you know what date your competition is, right? Back when
Mm-hmm.
I was in high school, we'd run track. You knew when your track meets were.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the dawn of the internet, so to speak. So we'd be able to get online and look up the Houston Chronicle and see what other people had ran that, the week before. You always kind of had it in your mind with at least your high school, at least in my school, we always knew what our particular individual sports kind of, at least our high school records were.
Mm-hmm.
So, we always had that. And if nothing else, you knew what you ran last time, or one always keeps in the back of their mind what their personal best has been. So, if nothing else, that becomes the goal, the effort, so to speak. So,
Mm-hmm.
when the match is, and you have some sort of ballpark or target in mind of what you're trying to go for. And come competition day, it's, you do everything you can to get there.
Yeah, you were as devoted as you could be, or as time would allow, and then on competition day, you saw whether or not that devotion stacked up to other people's devotion.
Right.
Well, so when you are fitness or output driven,
Mm-hmm.
you had talked about that as goals with an aesthetic or some kind of performance in mind.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
To me, this is a little bit, and this is a broad brush. And I realize that CrossFit has its own competitions, but if you see this as like a lot of CrossFitters in some ways, where you have workout of the day, you have your WOD, and come hell or high water, you're going to get through that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It doesn't matter, going a little bit with extremes, but it won't change your weights. This is the weight you chose. This is the weight of the workout. This is whatever it is. Right. And it's what you're going to do, and you're going to get through it. Team's going to help you and all this other kind of stuff. And that becomes the game, as it were. And it becomes the emphasis is about completionism, so to speak, and getting through the workout versus necessarily having a quality workout is how I feel about it.
So if you were to differentiate specifically, let's talk about CrossFit training versus results-driven competition training. Are you saying that with competition training, the way that you're talking about it, like a powerlifting meet or something,
Right.
you are going in and you are setting the metric,
Right.
right?
Right.
You are trying to beat a record. You're trying to beat whatever. Are you then saying that with something that is fitness oriented, the metrics are there for you to surpass, but they are externally decided metrics?
I think a lot of the times there is that involvement. I think everybody plays the game their own way, and so I think there's always going to be that. Again, personal records will always be there, I feel, for people, no matter what their devotion is or what their modality is. They know what they did at their peak performance and things of that nature, and they will always kind of hold on to those things. So again, if there's a number to be attributed to it or a value to be attributed to it, I think we always, again, we latch onto it and we keep that in the back of our minds as a watermark, so to speak. I feel like, again, with people that are like a power lifter and things of that nature, yeah, they want to get through their workout, but the concept of what's getting through their workout, I feel, is a little bit of a different thought pattern. Taking it back into programming, right? Not that both people aren't sweating, but again, a fitness individual, like they're for sweat, right there. And again, it's not really everyone's mentality in that regard, but it's that feel of if I didn't get a good sweat in, then I didn't get a good workout in, as I feel a little bit of that mentality. And even some aesthetic people kind of push that way as well too. It's no longer about necessarily quality movement. It's just the fact that I'm moving and that there's like half of my body mass in liquid on the floor when I'm done. I enjoy, like, after jiu-jitsu, I'll go hop on the scale just to see, and I'm like,
yeah,
right,
just to see how much water weight you lost there.
Let's keep that for another week.
Right. Something that's worthy of note is that people who are fitness oriented and people who are competition oriented, those two areas often have a really blurred line between them. It's really easy to transition from one into the other. It really is, like John was saying earlier, a matter of programming. The thing to note is that the more streamlined you are toward a goal, like competition kind of thing, like you had said, there are due dates with achievements, which means seasons. seasons that those things are on. You know, if you look at somebody who is a competitive bodybuilder, if you look at those people in the off season, they look more. I mean,
Human.
there's no doubt that those people are muscular and really gym and diet motivated people. But in the off season, they do not look like they do during competition season.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's no way anybody can walk around with 3%, 4% body fat and like live.
Right. Ronnie Coleman actually came under fire when one of his earlier interviews was dug up, and he was asked, how much body fat percentage did you just maintain all the time? And he said about 3% or something like that. And they're like, there's no way. And maybe there is some way, but you'd be moving at a snail's pace.
Yeah.
You know, be relentlessly cold and and have no energy for anything. When you are talking about health and wellness goals in like, you know, diet or exercise or whatever, there is no season to those things. You have no end date, and it's not necessarily observable. You know, whenever
that being said, I'd make the argument though that we could inject some seasonality into it, or a more holistic or more complete care, so to speak, of the body.
That has just as much to do with periodization or
Absolutely.
availability of environmental factors. Like if you are someone who's really big into cycling, and you, for instance, live in the United States in Colorado, from December through March, that's not available to you in the mountains, right? Like it's just not. So you have to find something else to do, and that's one aspect of periodization. There are seasons to things, but your approach to the intensity of them is what generally stays consistent. You have a consistent diet. You're not bulking or slimming down for this thing that's coming up. You are trying to maintain a certain quality of life, the same in January that it is in June, that it is in December. There is no doubt that when you see somebody just out in the world who is a competitive bodybuilder or a competitive power lifter, there's very little mistaking that person being eligible for those styles of competition, no matter how clothed they are. They walk into a space, and you're like, okay.
You're absolutely right. Right? Again, we can, you know, if you're walking through the grocery store, right? Again, we can all see. You see someone walking through, you can tell if they're kind of like have a swimmer's physique with like big broad shoulders and real small little scrawny legs. So dancer body, right? You know, someone who's very petite and small framed. There's what's called the specific adaptation induced principle, the SAID principle, right? And so the things, just taking it back into all the earlier analogies and metaphors, right, is as we narrow our scope of what we're working on, the more we become that, right? And so if we're doing bodybuilder style workouts, nice, slow, controlled reps and things of that nature, we're going to develop into that. If we're doing real strong, powerful reps, we're working on, you know, in cardio endurance, and we're, you know, running miles every day, we'll slowly be able to build up that aerobic capacity to be able to keep continuing that. And we'll, again, develop a physique that dictates that.
Right. And some of those things are observable to the outside world, and some of them are not. And depending on how you encounter that person, you may never know. So when we're talking about athleticism, you know, versus fitness versus health, and we look at the three things that sit on that equalizing level with regard to those things being intensity, frequency, and recovery. How we approach each one of those things is going to mandate the results that we get and the problems that we encounter, right? Like depending on what we're after versus what we can do and all of that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, choose two, and the third is just going to be victim of the other two, right? And so we look at intensity. You know, I've been a big preacher of high frequency over intensity, meaning that I'd rather have a client or myself have many workout sessions throughout the course of the weeks and the months and the years. And, you know, we do some moderate intensity during that time and have a good recovery versus we go so hard that we get less workouts throughout that time period. Therefore, we create less change throughout our body and potentially cause more pain. And so again, taking it back into those levelers, right? If we go real high on our intensity and we choose to do that every workout, our recovery is going to be trash. Just the nature of it. If you're doing 5 days a week of 60 to 90-minute workouts, and you're just going all out to where you got little weeble wobble baby giraffe legs going out the door, or you can barely wash your hair in the shower afterwards because your arms are just too heavy or whatever thing, right? Like that shit only gonna last for so long until you're not going to be able to do the next workout, or your next workout is going to be so terrible because you didn't recover. You can't output what you did the time before. And, again, that's a recipe for eventual injury as well, I feel. And we can take it to the other way, right? Where we do such low intensity, we just only focus on recovery, and we do so low intensity, right? We don't really create much adaptation. We don't create much change. And again, depending on what your circumstances are, maybe that's what you got for that time. But again, we have to make sure that if we're searching for change, we got to do something that creates a change, right?
Yeah, depending on what your goal is and what you have time for, that you have to lay out how much intensity you can put into whatever it is that you're doing.
I was gonna say also too, like recovery is kind of easy to just think that's like a rest day. And I think in a large part that is what you can see it as, almost like the antithesis of frequency. But really and truly, I would think of as recovery as, corrective exercises, mobility days, things that, again, taking back to kind of like the car analogy, it's car maintenance isn't just like at the auto mechanic. It's like checking your own windshield wiper fluid. That's car maintenance, right? Or, taking that little thing that looks like a pin and putting it on your tires to see, how much air is in your tire. Like that is car maintenance. It's checking the boundaries and making sure things are where you expect them to be. So that way, when you do need to use it, it's ready to rock and roll as you expect. So recovery in that same way, checking your ranges of motion. Do you have control through the ranges of motions that you expect? Can you exhibit some light strength in these ranges of motion and challenge yourself under a duration of time that's, again, low intensity, but it's enough that you're creating a little bit of work for you. And that can be recovery. I mean, that can be restorative to the body. And one of my favorite things to do is after a workout in supine, laying on my back and, T arms out to the side. I might go into like cactus arms even, and do some light rotation and twisting, especially if I did a big back workout, because my lats get real tight. And so I try to make sure I get those things lengthened out. And that is even part of a recovery. I could take that 5 minutes and do some more abs or something, right? And some people do that.
Yeah. So what you've been addressing, I've heard you talk about as the demand scale, and what's necessary to basically recover from its impact.
Right.
Now, if you go and research the science enough, depending on your consistency and your intensity, your recovery should be commensurate. How much sleep are you getting, right? What kind of food are you eating to fuel the recovery? Your muscle growth and your overall fitness and wellness doesn't happen when you are working out or when you are eating. It doesn't. It happens in all those spaces in between when your body is resting and recovering and
especially during sleep.
Right. And unveiling basically the results of the demand that you put on your body. So if we take those things into account, like we were saying earlier, you may want to have a competition level physique, but you may be only able to achieve for reasons of genetics or availability of your devotion. If you've got a partner and 2 young children, chances are your availability is going to be less than someone who doesn't have those things.
It's like I have a silly saying that popped in my mind. Something like having a billionaire's taste on a millionaire's budget.
My mother used to call that you've got a champagne appetite on a water income.
There you go. Yeah, or on a beer income. Champagne taste on a beer budget. Yeah, it's that same concept, right? Like, wrong to want those things or to have those goals. It's just being realistic and having the expectations to understand what's going to undertake. You know, the same thing for someone going through an extreme weight loss, right? If they're going to go through a diet and exercise and kind of, let's call it a natural weight loss process, like look at how long it took them to put it on, and you know that's going to be a really rough estimate about how long it's going to take you to get it off. You know, unless we're going to do something evasive, you know, some sort of major surgery or things of that nature. But, you know, that could be made, you know, you can make the argument, is that a lifestyle change, kind of what we were saying earlier, and is that going to be who you are afterwards? Right? Taking back into that demand scale, right? It's, you know, do you have the time and the capabilities to do these things? Painting it and talking about it off air was various sports demands. About a competitive fighter or an MMA competitor. Right, like there's a reason why their matches aren't week after week after week. I mean, I know the athletes still spar and they still train, but it ain't the same as, you know, trying to have someone kill you, you know, 3 times in 5-minute bouts, right? Like, so there's injuries that naturally occur. You know, you get punched in the eyebrow enough times or kicked in the shin enough times, like you're going to get battered and bruised. So those physical injuries have to. There's, you know, the fatigue factor, and you know, even though it's a short bout, like it still takes time for the body to recover, and the mental faculties and the adrenaline and all those kinds of things to kind of really calm down. I mean, it's, again, we talk about frequency and intensity, right? NFL, NBA, NHL, 60 minutes, right? Like these fights are 15 minutes.
Right.
And they get like a 2-minute break in between these 5-minute bouts. So again, that's saying that intensity is way ramped up. You know, they're jam packing as much intensity into 5 minutes, maybe 15, 30 minutes if it's a championship round. Again, football, 60 minutes.
Let's imagine for just a second, for scale, that you're walking along, you're looking over your shoulder, talking to someone, you turn back around, and a door frame is all of a sudden there. Bam, you hit your head. And I mean, you're like devoted walking that direction. You were walking at a speed that just assumed that door frame was not going to be there.
Yep.
And your head makes contact with that door frame. Think about that versus if that happened, say, wearing a helmet. When you're not wearing the helmet, your recovery from that is like somebody says, "Oh my God, what happened to your head?" Because it's got a big old bruise or a knot on it. And you go, "Oh, last week I ran into a door." Now picture that times the door frame running at you with ferocity, right?
Superman punch.
It's not just you walking into it. It's the door frame speeding at you, trying to hit you in the head.
Right.
Now picture that happening 700 times a minute for 15 minutes. It's an intense thing. You know, picture how that would feel. Or you fall down, you hurt a rib or something, right? It takes a long time to recover from that. That's not to say that football players or NHL players don't get the intensity, right? They do.
Oh, absolutely.
The difference being is that there's a game around that happening, right? That you still have to play, and you're padded. I'm not saying it's not intense. It's obviously really intense. I'm saying that picture the game being gone, and the only focus is bringing you down.
Get too far in the weeds with it, but we look at American football and then check out rugby players. I'm not saying one thing about the sports, but you just look at how much blood and bruising you see in NFL versus a rugby game. Like there are pints of blood in rugby games comparatively to NFL games.
Right. So the amount of intensity for competitions, like we said earlier, has seasons that accompany it. There are bouts of a person being in shape for that upcoming thing versus them not being in shape for that upcoming thing because the thing isn't on the horizon, right?
Yeah.
And those football games, like you were mentioning, or those basketball games, or whatever, someone can go and play a golf tournament every single day for a month. They play a baseball game every 3 days or something.
Every day,
right?
it seems like, right?
Yeah, number of games. Look at the intensity that's built in, and you'll see that recovery is kind of built into that. That's not saying at all that because a football team has a game every week that it's a healthy thing to get involved in. That's not saying that, right? But those fitness influencers and bodybuilders and performance-based athletes, they have seasons that they have to observe for their capability to be able to perform those things for as long as possible. And those that don't burn out, and they burn out quick. The thing that's most important to remember is that you have to align your available resources with your goals. So when you're looking at someone who is a performance-based athlete or a results-based athlete, right? Their job is to perform this thing or that thing. That's their job. They're getting paid to do that, right? They can spend so much time on it and allocate a bunch of resources for it because they are making money and income from it. And nobody who is a hobbyist is going to be able to achieve as much as someone who does it for a living. And, there is the other thing about the second that you take the thing that you love as a hobby and turn it into a career is the second that you need to find a new hobby.
Probably going to be the one that has to figure out how to piece it all together.